Though one young Royals hitter has gotten out of his slump, another one has fallen into one. Am I worried about it? We'll find out next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. And you can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, why I do this podcast, why I'm a diehard Royals fan, always have been. I'm based here in Kansas City, and I actually work in sports radio. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I do some co-hosting, some hosting from time to time there as well, and some producing. So I stay pretty busy in the sports world on a day-to-day basis. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, who unfortunately were rained out earlier today. So we'll have 2 days this week in which we don't get any Royals baseball at all because the Royals will have an off day on Thursday. But fortunately, we'll get 2 games tomorrow to close out that series in Chicago. Before we dive into our entire show today, I want to give a shout out to the title sponsor today and Monopoly Go. It is a fun mobile game, and you can also check on the leaderboards about where you rank, who's doing the best, who's building that tycoon, and who is bottoming out and becoming bankrupt. So a very fun game that we're going to talk about a little bit later on today in the show. But as I mentioned, the Royals were rained out in Chicago. It was going to be Brady Singer going up against Jonathan Cannon making his major league debut tonight. We'll have to wait till 1:10 tomorrow where they will have Singer and Cannon go head-to-head. And then 30 minutes after the conclusion of Game 1, we will see Michael Wacha and Eric Fetty going head-to-head to close out Game 3 of that series before the Royals fly back to Kansas City to take on a red-hot Baltimore team. And what's fun about that series, I will have a preview on it probably on Thursday's episode. That's what I'm going for. Is Thursday we'll have a full preview of that series, and we'll have to because on Friday it'll be a Mailbag Friday. We'll probably have tons of questions and won't have time to get into a preview. That could feature 2 teams with the best record in the American League. Your Kansas City Royals and the Baltimore Orioles playing in front of hopefully big crowds at Kauffman Stadium. I'm going to be out there on Saturday. Might be there on Sunday as well for media. So I might try to grab 2 of those 3 games there. If you haven't bought any tickets, use Game Time and try to get out there to Kauffman Stadium for a very, very fun series. That is a young and loaded Baltimore team and a Royals team that is playing better baseball than a lot of teams, not only in the American League, but in all of baseball. I think these guys do deserve a pretty big crowd all weekend long and all homestand long. They'll see the Toronto Blue Jays right after Baltimore leaves town on Sunday. But going to the team right now, there are certainly positives, right? Seth Lugo, a big positive. We talked about him last night. Well, let's just lump in the rotation. Overall, a huge positive, an overwhelming positive. Bobby Witt Jr., overwhelming positive. Vinny Pasquantino, now an overwhelming positive. Salvador Perez, positive. Nelson Velasquez, positive. MJ Melendez, positive. You've got so much going well for this team. And in the midst of all this winning, to maybe some out there, you haven't really realized that Maikel Garcia, who was one of the hottest guys to begin the year, is now the coldest guy in the lineup. He can't buy a hit right now. I believe now the streak is at 0 for 18. He did walk in yesterday's win against Chicago, but it's been ugly for him. This has been a true sophomore slump, if you will, and he's fighting a lot of it right now. And I've been asked the question, is Maikel Garcia pressing too much? I do believe he's pressing, and I think a little bit has to do with, his swing trajectory. I've seen a couple of pitches, maybe right down the heart of the plate, that he's still trying to lift. Now, I don't want to poo-poo lifting the ball because I said that was what was going to make him a better hitter. But sometimes when you're adjusting to that swing, doing that for the first time in a full season, you can go through some pretty long slumps. The question today is, though, am I worried about it? Should they move him down in the lineup? Should they give him a day off? It wouldn't shock me tomorrow if Maikel Garcia struggles in game 1 that they rest him for game 2. It wouldn't shock me too much, because if that streak gets over 0 for 20 something, you do just need him to gather himself a little bit. Now, this is a very talented hitter. This is a talented player in general. And this does not make me think differently about the player he is and who he could become. That to me is just something where you can't take 20 at bats. You can't take 50 at bats and go, this guy is clearly not cut out for it. And I also don't think you can take 50 at bats and think a guy is going to be a superstar or a great hitter. You want to believe in the good things that are happening and always push aside the negative things, but you have to put things into perspective. And right now with Maikel Garcia, there's too many advanced numbers that tell you he's going to be just fine. Right? There are other hitters in this lineup that I go, not a lot backs it up. Not a lot backs it up for that hitter to get things going. I look at Renfroe. I'm not as harsh on Hunter Renfroe as some of you are out there, and you've got every right to be. He's not been that great to begin the year, but I have seen some strides, some positive, progression through him with the bat. However, you look at some of the advanced numbers, he's not doing a lot well right now. So I couldn't sit here, speak into this camera, and say Hunter Renfroe is going to be just fine. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you Kyle Isbell is going to be just fine. I don't know if that bat is ever going to become something. I'm hopeful it will, and we've talked about it time and time and again, how he just needs to be league average. He doesn't even need to be a very good bat. But I look at guys like MJ Melendez, Maikel Garcia, Vinny Pasquantino, Nelson Velasquez. When those guys have their ups and downs, you've got numbers and data to back up that they're going to be fine. Right? Maikel Garcia has shown in big sample sizes before he can get really hot. And it's early enough in the season where if he goes 3 for 4 in game 1 and 2 for 4 in game 2, that average is well above 200. Right now, it's at like 172. No, he can get that back up to 240 in the blink of an eye. And like we talked about Vinny Pasquantino, some of it could be mental. We talked about it before that series against Houston, that Vinny Pasquantino was having to look at the big jumbotron in Kansas City and say, okay, I'm hitting 108. Right? It is tough to look at that and try to tell yourself you're doing good. Tell yourself you're going to be just fine. For a young hitter, I know I would struggle with that. I'm looking up and seeing .108 as my batting average. No, you give me up to 200, I'm feeling okay, because there's a couple other guys on the team that have batting averages that low. For Maikel Garcia, he's now seeing guys like Hunter Renfroe pass him in batting average. You just need to get the numbers back up over 200. You get a little bit more confidence back in you. And I think Maikel Garcia is a very confident player. We know how good he is defensively. And fortunately, that has not been a declining factor because he's struggling at the plate or he's scuffling at the plate. He's still very good over there at the hot corner for the Royals. And once he gets going again, then you feel much better about that top 5, right? Or maybe even that top 6. At the end of the day, you got to take it in lumps, and you also got to put into perspective that the Royals are still winning games despite this struggle, right? If the Royals were 0-4 with this offense struggling and Garcia was having problems, I think you could start to look yourself in the mirror and go, okay, what is the best course of action to get him back to where he was, to get him back to the 2-hit Maikel Garcia, ambushing first pitch, hitting the ball 105, 106 miles an hour. What can we do to get back to that point? The good thing is the Royals are 2-2 in this rough offensive stretch. Doing fine right now. Now, you would hope you would have grabbed one more of those games in which the offense struggled, likely the game on Sunday. But there's not a need to panic right now. There's not a need to move him down in the lineup. Because I also firmly believe in this as somebody who follows baseball, who consumes baseball, who considers baseball to be the best sport out there. My favorite sport to watch. When a guy is hitting well in a certain spot, it's not always the best action to move them up, right? I had heard people say, well, MJ Melendez is hitting really well. He should be a leadoff hitter. He's been a leadoff guy before. Well, MJ Melendez looks pretty comfortable in the 5-hole. Now, he's been slumping a little bit of late, but more so when he was hitting well. Like really, really well. He's still doing just fine. But when he was in his hot stretch, that's showing that he's comfortable in the 5-hole. Just because he's doing better than your leadoff guy, it doesn't mean you swap them. You only swap them when that leadoff hitter becomes an absolute liability. Like, he can't do absolutely anything. And in the first 17 games, that feels a little bit like a knee-jerk reaction. I think Maikel Garcia is good enough to get through this and not become a liability at one point. He's too talented. Now, we could find out in a month or two that maybe the leadoff spot, it just isn't that good for him. Maybe it is MJ Melendez. But when you're 11-6 and the offense has had outputs of 11 runs and 10 runs and 12 runs, you might just go into it thinking it's hot and cold right now. And you're banking on tomorrow, maybe game 1 or game 2, he catches fire again. Has a 2-hit game, has a 3-hit game, and get him back up on the horse. Just to not see 0 for 18 or 0 for 19 in the box score like he's had over the last 5 to 6 games of this brutal stretch offensively. But to wrap it all up, I am not concerned whatsoever about Maikel Garcia's recent slump. Will I be concerned if it gets to 0 for 30 or 0 for 35? Probably at that point. I think I would be a little bit concerned if we're going that long without a hit, but I don't expect it to stretch that far. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, MLB Network has been giving a lot of praise to the Royals, and I'm going to tell you why it's been such a good thing and refreshing to see the boys in blue as such a hot talking point on one of the network's biggest shows. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to a couple of the sponsors today, starting with Monopoly Go. Now, with Monopoly Go, as I said to begin the show, it's one of the more fun mobile games you can have out there. But I want to talk about the leaderboards, because the leaderboards are a very fun way to check in on everybody, right? That is having fun, playing Monopoly. You're seeing who's doing the best. You're seeing who's really struggling. And I think that it's one of those games out there that is growing in popularity. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, and it's a great mobile twist on classic Monopoly. You can play it anywhere, anytime, and you can explore hundreds of Monopoly boards from Las Vegas to Camelot to the moon, all while raking in a huge fortune. But my favorite part is the leaderboards that I just mentioned, where you can see who's a Monopoly tycoon and who's gone bankrupt. So go get yourself on the charts, download Monopoly Go, and it's free on the App Store and on Google Play. You just can't get enough Monopoly when you're playing it either in person or you're playing it on your phone against people you don't even know. But I strongly suggest that it's one of the more popular games out there. Also want to give a shout out to our other sponsor today, and we actually teased them a little bit in the opening part of our show, in Game Time. If you're thinking about buying tickets, you want to go to this upcoming homestand, whether it be the Orioles series or it be the Blue Jays series, go and use Game Time. It is the best app to use when you are buying tickets. I use it now for tickets to anything, whether it be a Royals game, a Chiefs game, KU, K-State, Missouri, be a comedy show, it'd be a concert. Really, there's nothing I stray far from. I just go to Game Time. I see the best possible deals, the hottest deals, the best bundle deals, and they get your tickets sent right over. There's no hassle, whether you're going by yourself, you're going with 2 people, you're going with a group of people. I'm going on Saturday with a group of people, bought those tickets on Game Time. It was very simple. I never have to worry about it. Never have to worry about being scammed out of tickets. And I know for some of you out there, that is a worry when you are trying to buy tickets, not just online, but on an app that you may or may not trust. So here is what you need to do after listening to the podcast episode today. You can go and download the Game Time app, create your account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, unfortunately, since I have YouTube TV, I feel like I've expressed this a few times on the show, I don't get the benefit of watching MLB Network in the same way that I used to. I mean, MLB Network was what I watched before school, before work, when I'd come home, and then after the Royals game, I'd flip it on and see the highlights, quick pitch. I think if you are a consumer of MLB Network, you know that's kind of the routine. You watch your game, and then you watch the highlights at night. If you don't watch the highlights at night, you would watch them in the morning. That's just what I would do every single day once I kind of got off ESPN. ESPN to me just didn't really give me interesting stories anymore. And once they kind of got away from that board of the top 10 plays and the highlights, and that was just my morning before school, I switched over to MLB Network. And I was always loving the shows they had. Intentional Talk, with Chris Rose and Kevin Millar. I loved High Heat for a little bit with Mad Dog Russo, not so much to the tail end of it. I also loved MLB Now. Of course, I loved Quick Pitch. And I just was fascinated, whether it was in season or it was the off season. And the Royals, what's been so cool to see is what I should say. The Royals have kind of become this darling to baseball, and because they are a great story in April. And again, as we discussed last week, or it might have been in yesterday's episode, they sometimes blend together for me. It's all right to be excited about a hot start. It's all right to feed into this. It's all right to believe again. MLB Network is certainly loving what the Royals are doing, and they believe that it's not just some short stint. And I kind of chuckled to myself tonight as I saw Dan O'Dowd, talking about the Royals in the American League Central. I'm like, there has been multiple players in the last week on MLB Network. Reagan's was there. He was interviewed. Brady Singer was. MJ Melendez was. They're talking about the Royals in different segments. They're talking about Bobby Witt Jr. They're talking about Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha. And you go, man, there's more publicity on this team in the first 16, 17 days of April than there ever was from 2018 to 2023. Now, you would think I'm saying that to take a shot at MLB Network of, oh, you never cared about us. Don't try to care about us now. No, it is because those other teams were not worth talking about. I mean, really, before the second half of last year, Reagan's and Bobby Witt Jr. were thriving. MJ Melendez. What could you talk about? What could you talk about in 2018? The good years, the golden years of the Royals were behind us at that point. The Royals were putting out old players, guys that were struggling. They had no top prospects. He didn't really talk. In 2019, kind of the same story. The only intriguing part of the Royals in that 2018 to 2023 stretch was 2021 and the first month and a half of the season. They bottomed out. It was a bad team in disguise. This team feels different, and I think MLB Network knows that. I think talking heads around baseball know that. And what I loved back on the golden years of the Royals, there was that point in time in 2013 and 2014 where people kind of embraced them as this lovable team. It was like their fan base had gone through so much torture, and now they're enjoying a fun team. Kansas City has historic roots to baseball, and when they're on top, they're easy to root for. And right now, this Royals team is easy to root for, and I'm taking satisfaction that we've got so much goalposts moving from the negative part of the fan base or negative people out there. And in the end, they could be right? I will never be naive to the fact it's early and they could always collapse, right? The Royals could be a 75-win team this year, a 72-win team. It would still be a big win improvement, but I know right now everybody's got their sights set on playoffs because you start this well, the run differential stuff, you're excited about it. There are star players, there are quality caliber players on this team now. But the goalpost moving to me is starting to make me think, they're good enough that it's worth mentioning this, a collapse could be coming. Instead of talking about a collapse right now, if the Royals had struggled out of the gates, they would be buried already because Cleveland, double digits in wins. The Royals, double digits in wins. Detroit, double digits in wins. I mean, Minnesota is 6-10 now. They kind of feel buried a little bit. They know that they're going to get healthier, they're going to get better, but it sucks to look up when you're already 4 or 5 games out. The White Sox are completely buried. We know that. But the goalpost moving is kind of an indicator of, you are worth talking about. Of, just wait, they're going to get exposed eventually. I kind of chuckle at it a little bit. Like after the Baltimore series, and then the Royals play the White Sox, they sweep the White Sox, and it was, just wait, they'll be exposed by the Astros. They sweep the Astros. Not a completely healthy Astros team, but they swept them. And the Mets were supposed to completely expose them. Mets took 2 of 3 from them, but I think the Royals left going, we should have taken 2 of 3. And the White Sox, it doesn't matter. It's the White Sox. You got to beat a bad team. Good teams beat bad teams. The Royals are 5-0 against the bad team. And MLB Network is taking notice a little bit, and they're giving praise. And I think that's cool to see because they got praise in the offseason about the moves they made. They got praise in spring training, and then it was they got a lot riding on this. There's a lot of pressure on this team. Are they going to be able to live up to it? And so far in April, they're not just treading water like I wanted them to. They are busting through the mark I had set for them. I said get through the first 32 at 14-18. That would put them at 3-12 for the next 15 games. I think they're going to do a little bit better than 3-12. They likely will be over 500, knock on wood, but over 500 after that first 32-game stretch. Royals fans are taking notice, baseball fans are taking notice, and MLB Network is taking notice. And it's fun to have a time period right now where the Royals are interesting to talk about and people are buying in a little bit more than maybe they were in the offseason. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about this doubleheader preview a little bit and what I expect to see from this team before they ship back out to Kansas City and welcome a red-hot Baltimore Orioles team. But before we do that, I want to remind you about Locked On's NFL Mock Draft live on April at 6 p.m. It's streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on April 17th at 6 p.m. Central Time to hear who the local experts of Locked On are picking for every NFL franchise with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft on April 17th at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Streaming live on Locked On Sports Today, the 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. When we come back, we're going to talk about this doubleheader. Brady Singer in Game 1, Maikel Walker Game 2. Can the Royals take both of those to sweep the White Sox for the second time in April? We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the final sponsor today in the LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Right now, you can try the LinkedIn Sales Navigator and get a 60-day free trial at linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/lockedon for a 60-day free trial. Let the LinkedIn Sales Navigator help you sell like a superstar today. Just go to linkedin.com/lockedon and go get started. Well, it's going to be a fun Wednesday tomorrow, whether you be at work, maybe you don't have work at all. We're going to get 18 innings of baseball between the Kansas City Royals and the White Sox. The only downside is we didn't get any baseball tonight, and I was kind of bummed about that because I had planned my night on watching Brady Singer hopefully deal, and the Royals win the season series against the White Sox on April 16th. Would have felt pretty good. But now it feels even better if you win Game 1 and Game 2 tomorrow and you head back to Kansas City with a 13-6 record, welcoming one of the hottest teams in baseball in the Baltimore Orioles. It's going to be fun. Now, I say hottest team or one of the hottest teams in baseball. Milwaukee did take the series against Baltimore, but the way Baltimore's playing, it's pretty scary right now. And the same way it was pretty scary when the Royals headed off to Camden Yards to take on Baltimore. Now, the best news about this is after this Sunday, they won't see Baltimore again unless the Royals make the playoffs. So you don't have to worry about Baltimore, in June or July if you're in a tough stretch and then you got to go to Camden and take on maybe Baltimore when they're at their best. You get done with them in April, and that you should really be relieved about. What is a bummer, though, too, is that after tomorrow, the Royals won't see the White Sox until the mid part or the end of July. So those gimme wins that have seemed to be so easy for the Royals through the first 5 meetings, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. But I also think this is a perfect opportunity, and it was a perfect opportunity for the Royals to play the White Sox at this point in time because padding wins in April is important, right? Because I do think the best part of this team, the best baseball, it's down the road. You're hoping it's down the road. For anybody that is thriving right now, you kind of feel like you're playing with house money. It's like, man, let's just keep rattling off wins. We feel like we're going to be better down the road. This is typically where we struggle. So let's just keep adding on wins. And if they win both tomorrow and they are 13-6, I can't stress this enough. Go out to the ballpark this weekend. I'm not going to sit here and tell people how to spend their money, but I looked at tickets for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. For a lot of us out there, it's doable. Now, if you're bringing 4 people, 5 people, I get it. That's over $100+. That's a lot to deal with. But if you're just thinking, hey, I'm not doing anything, want to go with a buddy, want to go with my girlfriend, want to go with my boyfriend, want to go with my dad, my mom, grandparents, it's going to be a fun weekend. Like, this is a series that puts you on the map a little bit. If you can take these final 2 in Chicago, winning a doubleheader, you've won 7 games against the White Sox in April. I mean, you'd be 13-6, and yeah, more than half of your wins are against the worst team in baseball. But then you get to test yourself again against the team that you felt like you should have swept on the road. That should be fun. And hopefully, the weather's not going to be as good as it is right now, where you're getting high 70s and 80 degrees. It's going to be a little bit chilly for those night games, but you're talking high 50s, mid 50s, and maybe to begin some of the games it'll be in the low 60s. But go out there and support this team. Again, I don't want to step across any lines and say that, we should all just spend endless amounts of money. I get it can be expensive to go to the ballpark because of what concessions charge, parking, all of that. But that's what I'm looking forward to tomorrow is just the energy and the feeling going into an off day if the Royals enter Thursday at 13-6. It's still early, but it would be a fun series lining up because Baltimore, they've played really well against Minnesota. They've helped out the Royals by keeping the reigning division champions, I should say, down still. Minnesota can't hit worth a lick right now. Their pitching's not been very good, and Baltimore looks like a buzzsaw once again. But for the Royals, that good measure, even if they lose the series, one of those games isn't competitive, it's a good measure about where they still are, right? And then I think the confidence with this team, if they take the final 2 in Chicago, they sweep this doubleheader tomorrow, which even though that's really hard to do, it's hard to imagine the White Sox winning one of those games. Just the way the Royals are playing right now, the way their pitching staff is, and what the pitching matchups look like. You got a rookie and then Eric Fetty in game 2. I could always be wrong. I don't want to jinx anybody, so yeah, you'll hear me knock on wood once again. But man, I think it is such a good measuring tool. I know our segment was to talk about the doubleheader, but I'm looking at this doubleheader and saying just pad wins because I want the hype for that Baltimore series to be pretty good in April. Like, let's get out to Kauffman Stadium and feel good about a team that is either in first place or right behind Cleveland. And if you lose the series against Baltimore, let's hope all 3 games are really competitive. You win that series against Baltimore, think about how you're feeling now. I mean, are you starting to buy in that it'd be at 22 games into the season? Still very early. But man, you think about sweeping the doubleheader tomorrow. You take 2 of 3 against Baltimore. You're 15-7. It's still incredibly early, but I'm now looking at that 40-game sample size. That, to me, is where you can get a really good gauge on who your hitters are going to be, who your pitchers are going to be, what's your bullpen going to look like. Those are all really intriguing points to me. And tomorrow, take care of business. If you do split, you only can take 1. Well, you're still 12-7. 5 games above 500, welcoming one of the best teams in all of baseball. Again, I really hope for a big crowd. If you are going to the game or you're buying tickets, let us know in the YouTube comments or let us know in the Twitter comments. You can always find me at JohnnyJ_15. Well, that is going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Again, be sure to give me that follow at JohnnyJ_15 and find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and we're on YouTube and Odyssey. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. Before we say goodbye, want to give one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to recap both those doubleheader games and give a little bit more of a deep dive into the numbers of this bullpen, and maybe we'll pick some of our stars from the doubleheader games between the Chicago White Sox and the Kansas City Royals. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.